Hi friends, welcome back to our See the Light, Yes You Can Draw Club. I'm Pat Nepley. I'm your master artist. I'm glad that you're here to join me in learning how to be a better artist. Today is club meeting number 34, Let's Face It, Part 2. Let's review what you're going to need for today's meeting. Really just one piece of paper will be great, a ruler, a standard pencil, a good eraser, and a nickel. And I would prefer you have one of the older nickels as opposed to one of the brand new nickels that they're printing now. All right, last time we were together we talked about portraits and we learned just some very basic proportions for when you're trying to do a full face portrait. But not every portrait is full face, you know that. And so I want to talk to you about some other options you have with portraits, and that's the profile. And the profile is the side view. Well, before we get to that, let me show you some portraits that are what we call 3/4 view. Here's a portrait that was done in France, and it's called Guy XVII, the Count of Laval. And you'll notice that, again, he's very serious because he had to sit for this portrait, but this is what's known as a 3/4 view. You can still see both eyes, but you only see one ear, and you only see one side of the nose, not the other side of the nose. And this view, a 3/4 view, is the most popular form of portraiture that you'll find. It's just more interesting than someone looking straight on at the artist. And most of the subjects who would sit for a portrait preferred not to be looking right at the artist. It made them uncomfortable. They'd rather just look off to something else. And so that's a 3/4 view. So as you look through magazines and look at pictures, or if you look at other artwork, notice how often you're going to see that 3/4 view, where you simply see one ear and just a portion of the side of the face. Now, another type of portraiture we're going to be working with is called the profile. And that's what we're going to spend time on today. The profile is the side view. And that's where you only see the outline of the side of the face. So you'll see one eye and one ear and just half of the face, whatever side is facing the artist. And the profile was actually a pretty popular form of portraiture as well. Look at this painting by the artist Jean-Dominique Ingres, and it's called Madame Edmond Cavée. She's a really lovely lady, and the best way to show the beauty of women was with a profile portrait. They felt it was softer and more appealing than the 3/4 view or the straight-on view. And so you just simply see her silhouette, the side of her face, against that black background. Okay, now here's some profile portraits that I have done. These are my nephews. There's this one here, that's my nephew Sean, and this is my nephew Ian. And I simply did these with a standard pencil and a white pencil. And you see it's their side view, where you simply see one eye, one ear, and they're looking off to the side. So where do you see profile portraits the most? Well, you actually see it every day, and that's on our coins. Here is a standard nickel, and that's why I had you grab that nickel. But if you'll notice on the quarter, there's George Washington's profile, and on our nickel we have Thomas Jefferson's profile. Do you know who's on the penny? Whose profile is that? Exactly, Abraham Lincoln. And there's the profile of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, another president, on our dime. So when we're talking about a profile portrait, there's a common mistake that young artists make, and I want to talk with you about that. We make our profiles too skinny. So I want to show you this quick profile I did so that you can see that this head fits into a square. And when we go to do our profile of Thomas Jefferson, you'll see the same thing. And if I were to divide this square in half and in half again, just like when we did our full portraits, you'll notice all of the same rules apply. Do you remember when we did our full face portrait, we talked about how the eyes are at the halfway line, not at the top of the head? So if you see this profile in the square, you'll notice the eye is at the halfway line. If I were to divide this bottom half again, right, you'll see that most of the features are in the bottom half of this square. The ear is not up near the facial features like the eye and the nose. It's way back here because the head actually fits into this square. And that's because, friends, there's a skull under here, and we often forget that. So one of the biggest mistakes I see is that young artists will draw the front features of the face of a profile and make the back of the head way close up here. But it's actually much larger than you think. It fits into this square. So how are you going to get started drawing a profile portrait? We're going to start with a square, and you're going to have your nickel handy. Now, it's going to be really difficult for me to keep picking up a nickel and looking at it. So what I did was I blew up a nickel here so that I can see Jefferson's profile really clearly. And we're going to use this as a guide. Now, this is something I love to do with students because you can practice over and over again, and you're not asking a friend to sit still for a long time because coins are pretty easily available. And if you're sick of doing Jefferson, you can take another coin and do someone else. So I'm going to work rather large. I don't want you to work that large, but I don't want you to work as small as a nickel. So about the size of your fist or a little bit bigger. And the first thing you're going to do is freehand a square. You don't have to measure it out. You're just going to freehand a square. And once you freehand the square, you're going to divide it in half and in half again. And then the bottom half, you're going to divide that in half again. And so these quadrants are what we're going to use to draw our profile. Now the first place to start is with the top of the head, because that shape will kind of set the tone for everything else. So when I look over here at Jefferson, I'm going to start with his forehead. But you see how I know that the nose is the furthest thing out on his portrait. And the nose is going to fit in the square. So if I know that his forehead is going to slant in this first box. So we're just going to work in this first box right here. We know that the eye line is halfway. The eye line is at the bridge of the nose. That's where the nose starts. And you see that's an indentation. So I know I have to indent in from the edge. I'm just going to make a little guess and make a mark for the indentation of the bridge of the nose. And my forehead line is going to go up from there. And I have to fit this whole top part in here. The eyebrow ridge for a guy is usually pretty prominent. So you're going to kind of bulge out. And then think of a diagonal line. Just very lightly draw a diagonal line, just like a curve. And now we're going to fix it or adjust it. It's going to stretch right to the top corner of our square down to this eyebrow ridge. Jefferson's forehead is slightly bumpy. So I'm going to make kind of a bumpy line. And then he's got a lot of hair up there. And it's kind of wavy-ish. And so all I'm working on is the top of the head and the forehead to the indentation, that's the bridge of the nose. Now we know that the nose extends from the eye line, which is halfway, to this mark, halfway again. Remember when we did full face portraits and we learned where the eye line is halfway down and that the base of the nose is at the next halfway mark? The same thing applies in a profile, okay? So we know our nose is going to end on that line. And I know it's going to extend right to the end of the square because a profile generally fits in a square. So I'll just make a basic line, and I want you to think of a slanted letter L for a nose. So when you see things in profile, a slanted letter L would be like this with a strong point. But we know noses generally don't come to that much of a point, but that's the basic shape, a slanted letter L. So I'm going to connect to this indentation, and I'm going to make a subtle and slightly curved letter L right out to the edge of this quadrant. Here's his nostril that defines, and you can see it's like right under this eyebrow, right under this indentation here, this bridge of the nose. And so again, we're going to use our parentheses that rests on that base line. Now these are just basic proportions. We're just using our friend Thomas Jefferson, one of the founders of our country, as our guide, since his profile is right there for us. Now these features here, the bottom half, are going to fit in this quadrant. Okay? So from the base of the nose to the chin. And the main thing I'm going to focus on is that indentation where the two lips meet. So this is where the attention to detail is so important, friends. Take a careful look. Jefferson's indentation where his two lips meet, and then his lower lip kind of poofs out a little bit. This is subtle. It's not big. And one thing I do notice about our third president is he has a pretty prominent chin. And most people's chin lines up in profile under their eyebrow ridge. So you can use your pencil as a guide and see where the eyebrow ridge ends, and that's where the chin comes out. Now it's time to focus on this line that defines where the two lips meet. It's a little line, and I see that the end of the mouth is just past the nostril, and it curves up just slightly. So there we are with just the front features, and notice how it's all in this front half of our square. The ear will be in the second half of the square because it's actually quite a ways from the tip of the nose to the back of the ear. A common mistake for young artists is to put the ear, since they think of it as a facial feature, close to the up front features, but it's actually way back on the skull. And we know that the ear, it's hidden here under Jefferson's hair, but we know that the top of the ear is at the eye line, and the base of the ear is generally at the base of the nose. Now, Jefferson's was a little longer, and I'm going to explain to you why. As people age, their features start to sag a little bit. So you'll notice as people get older, the ear line will drop. And so if you're doing someone that's older, the ears will be a little bit lower, and the nose might even sag a little bit. So even though we can't see Jefferson's ear, I know just past our midline, very lightly, I'm just going to draw an ear. And I'm going to have it dip just below, because he's a little older, below that half mark. But that also helps tell us where the hair is going to be, once I know where the ear is. So I have these features, but I'm missing the eye. Now, when we learned about full face portraits, we learned that the football shape is the general shape you use to do the eye, but not when it's from the side. Although, I have seen some young artists, when they're drawing profile, mistakenly use the football shape for the eye. I don't want you to think of a football shape. I want you to think of a pizza slice. Now, I'm sure you've had a piece of pizza. And so the eye from the side will look like a pizza slice. That means that it will be rounded towards the front and a point towards the back, like that, a pizza slice. Now, depending on the person, it can either be very narrow or smaller or wider. And that's where paying attention to detail is so important. For our friend Jefferson, again, he's a little older, so it's a little narrower pizza slice with another thinner pizza slice on top. That's his eyelid. And from the side, you only see a very small portion of the iris, and so it's more like just a parenthesis. You're not drawing an actual circle. Same thing with the pupil, okay? Now, a very important feature for men is the eyebrows. You saw this eyebrow ridge here. So all we're going to do is start to do some light strokes like hair, getting smaller as we head back over the eye. But the eyebrows are an important characteristic that defines likeness. So once we have our features here, basic features, remember pizza slice, not football, and that the nose is a slanted letter L, never with a full point, but everyone's nose is a little different. You want to look at the front. And we never draw full lips. We really focus on the line. That is where the two lips meet. Okay? So that's the basics of profile. Now, all the rest of this will be hair. It's a little tricky to draw hair. All we're really worried about now, friends, is getting the overall shape. And we want to kind of fill out our square. And it looks like kind of bumpy, doesn't it? So you just kind of do some bumpy marks. And it doesn't have to fit perfectly in the square. It's more like that. But he had a ponytail. That was the style back then, so it's going to go past our square. So I'm just going to draw Jefferson's ponytail kind of coming down here. That was the kind of the colonial thing. And his chin line came up here, and he has this giant collar on, which was also the style back then. So we have the outline. Once you have the basic outline, you can kind of see that there would be a skull under there. And now it's a matter of very carefully looking at the details to see where the hair starts. The hair does not start right next to the eye, but it's usually right in front of the ear. So we know that our ear is right at this line, so the hair would be just in front of the ear. So you could draw some subtle lines to kind of show where the hair would start. Now, I could spend a lot of time, friends, just really working on hair to get it just right. What we really want to focus on is how you get a profile. So that's the basics of a profile, using the same proportions that we used when we did our full face figure, right? Half, half, and half again. Very important. If we were to divide the upper half, we learned that that would be the start of a hairline. And the older the person is, the further back the hairline goes. Well, I hope you had fun doing this profile portrait. You know, Thomas Jefferson is a pretty important guy. He was one of the founders of our country. We see him on a lot of our currency. You might have studied a lot about him in school, but he was a mere man. And even though he was great, he does not come up to what Jesus was, who was fully man and fully God. In fact, there's a great Bible verse about that. Let me share that with you. It's in Hebrews. Hebrews 2:17 says, "For this reason he, Jesus, had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people." See, Jesus was fully God, had all the attributes of God. He was all-powerful. He was all-knowing. He was everywhere. But he was also fully human. That meant he felt pain and sadness and emotions like anger. He also felt hunger. Do you remember when he was tempted by Satan after all of those days in the desert? He was hungry, and Satan tried to use his hunger and his bread to get him to sin, but Jesus did not give in to that. He did not sin. But he was fully human and fully God at the same time. I know that's hard for us to wrap our minds around sometimes, but it's wonderful to know that the Savior, for me, is not just a mere human. He is fully God. That's a great promise. All right, friends, spend some time doing some profile portraits this week. Use coins, but also ask a friend to just watch TV for a while and sit at the side and try and sketch them and remember some of the basics we went over. Or maybe while someone's reading a book, they usually are in the same position for quite a while. That would be great. Now, the next time we're together, we're going to be also working on people, but the full figure, and that's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope you'll join me at our next See the Light, Yes You Can Draw Club, because yes, you can draw. Okay, friends, bye-bye.